Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thank you, MJ, for the introduction. Yeah. So my name is Ching Ping. Just call me CP, will do. I'm from FORTINET, and I cover business development of the security fabric in Southeast Asia and Hong Kong. Right. So as part of my role, right, I travel the region, I talk to customers, and right, let's call a spade, a salesman. All right. But the thing is this, right? While we have all these discussions, one of the things that invariably comes up as we discuss our work, as we try to position some things with our customers itself, this question comes up quite frequently, right? It's a rhetorical question to all of you, right? Well, every time when this question comes up, right? What's the answer? Right? What would your answer be? Typically, I would hear two things. First is, everything is outsourced, all right? And some is, oh yeah, I have a SOC. It's sitting somewhere, for a larger companies. Oh, maybe I'm building one in, let's say, the Philippines or in India. There was one customer who would say, oh, next week I'm going to India to, source for things, get the people, and then start hiring and build my own SOC, right? But regardless, right? There would be people who are, crossing over from either in-source to outsource, outsource to in-source. But regardless, it's going to be same thing, right? They ultimately hold the accountability of the security or the cyber security of their company itself, right? So if you think of the SOC, what do they do? What do they really do, right? This is not from me. When I was doing this deck, right, I just did a search, and depending on which vendors website you hit, they're gonna say something like that, right? You gotta monitor and alert, you gotta do detection, prevention. This morning, Brian and just now Christina also talked about it, right? Invariably, it's gonna be all this. But if you were to just cut this, right, into simpler terms, old adage, right, this still holds true in many ways. We are talking about people, and when we say people, it's the threat analysts, the threat hunters. If you've got it in-source, some of them may prefer to also, do some of those things outside, augment it with service providers, be it for managed detection services, threat hunters. They retain IR analysts, IR services. You got to work closely with threat researchers, right? In the industry itself. And then, believe it or not, right, training sometimes is also part of the work. And training is not just for the guys within the SOC. Right? When we talk about cybersecurity, everybody is responsible for it. So they may need to also drive that training for the entire organization in terms of what awareness, maybe phishing simulation, right? These sort of things. Right? So this is one part of it. Then the other part, of course, is the processes, right? How do you respond if there is an incident? The processes comes in. If you have a SOC, how ready are you? Right? How ready is the company? Even if you've got it outsourced, you may also want to evaluate your service provider, right? What's their processes when it comes to IR? How ready are they? Do you want to do a tabletop exercise with them on an annual basis? Right? After all, they are kind of your extended arm, isn't it? So this is the second part. And of course, the third part is the technology, right? And we've heard these terms, right, a couple of times today about how you discover and detect threats, how do you protect them, and then how do you recover and respond, right, to them. So if you were to really look at all this, is the SOC a place, or are we talking about a function? Right, and the gist of my presentation is this, right? So let's look at this and then see what are the tools and services that will help us to, fulfill that function itself. Right? So if we were to just break it into three things: detect and discover, protect, and then respond and recover. Let's talk about the first one, detection and discovery, right? There's going to be real-time updates that you need. What are the vulnerabilities out there, the newly discovered ones, globally, right? Do you have any, maybe even identifying or discovering devices within your network that you may not even know exist, right? Because these could be potential points of entry, right? Adding to your attack surface itself. Then we want to be able to discover and detect threats within the network, be it an attacker who is already living off the land. How do you use deception technology to lure them out, and then be able to do something about it, right? Discover where your threats are. Maybe you have a machine or machines that are already compromised, right? And they are sending traffic laterally to spread that malware or what have you, right? So network detection and response comes in handy. But if you look at these detection techniques, they are something that you can control. Can control in the sense that they are within your infrastructure, right? But from a cybersecurity point of view, threats can come from not just within, but also from without, right? And these are the things that you may not have control over. Of course, you can't control what the cyber criminal is going to do, what the threat actors are going to do. And this is where we say, hey, external services are required, right? To, first, if an attacker is eyeing your organization, what are they going to do, right? The enemy is going to look in, right, from outside because they are not inside. So what is your view of your organization? You need to know that, right? And once you know that, then you can patch, right? You want to have that same view as what that attacker is having. That's one. But attacker can also be, imitating your brands. Right? There are so many various avenues for them to do today. If you have an app, they could be coming out with a fake application, mimicking your organization, tricking your customers to it, right? They can come up with fake websites, doppelganger websites, to again trick your customers, maybe trick your employees as well, right? In the social media, they can be coming out with, again, a fake account, right? Faking and ultimately trying to trick your customers, your employees, and of course also going after the VIPs within the organization itself. And lastly, there would be chatter, right? Cyber criminals, I think earlier Abi was also mentioning, right? Crime as a service. They must have a community, right? They are operating in the dark web itself. So what's happening within the dark web? What's the chatter? Are they trying to exploit a certain CVEs that you may think that it's very low risk, so you've got it pushed for remediation 1 month later? But what if in the dark web people are already talking about how to exploit that CVE? Then the risk level goes up, right? Maybe you want to address that this weekend instead. So these intelligence are important, right? So that's for discovering, right? Detecting threats within the organization, discovering what people are doing out there. One other thing that I wanted to add on the discovery, right, is that maybe they are targeting a certain vertical, a certain geography, right? Because you tend to learn from each other, isn't it? So if they've succeeded in one, now maybe you want to be extra careful as well. This probably is a lot more familiar to many of us, right? Because we started, probably the industry is all about protection, right? I think Brian also talked about it earlier. So things like antivirus, web filtering, okay, application control, etc. We're not saying that, with all the detection techniques, you're going to do away with this. These are equally important, right? As part of your strategy itself. Um, Together with endpoint detection, though we say that, hey, antivirus, is still going to be there, is there any better way to do it through AI, through ML within your endpoint, and then using that same tool to do threat hunting across your organization, extending it to your email security, network security, etc., all coming together so that you can get a better alert triage for response, right, and for recovery later on. And lastly, sandboxing, it's been around for a few years, right? Is it relevant? I think the quick answer is yes, it is, because your threat analysts are gonna need to know that, right? One thing that I get very often, right, you say, hey, if it stops at an endpoint, if you're able to cut the process, then isn't that good enough? I think it's half the question, right? Because yes, you've prevented that, but are there traces of or hints of what the attacker is trying to do with your organization itself? If you were to allow this file, this malware to run its full course, right? And this is where the sandbox comes in very useful. You drop it in, you see what the attacker is trying to do. Then you can know how to respond as well, right? And learning not just from humans, but also making use of AI to understand better and come out with the, signatures, if you will, right, to block such an attack coming in. And lastly, probably the response or the recovery part is what some people would associate an SOC with the most, right, instead of just the top two. Instead of the top two, yeah. So it's about, real-time updates. I talked about, knowing what the threats are, being able to come out with the signatures, temporary or what have you, right, to block it. So that's one way. SIEM and SAW for automation, it's something that's, I think, very well known as a tool, right? And especially for SAW, right? Previously, because it starts with an S, security, people tend to think that it's for security. But actually, it's a tool for the organization-wide, even for IT automation itself, right? And SOC as a service, regardless whether you've outsourced, you've insourced, this is a good service for you to engage and augment the skill sets within your organization itself, right? Be it for your firewalls, for your endpoints, etc. And lastly, a retainer on incident response service itself. I'm just going to talk a little bit more on the services, right? And especially, when we talk about, SOC, regardless which route you have chosen, there is a lot of scope in terms of, how we handle your roadmap itself, your security roadmap, skill set shortages, employee turnover, right? Looking after the continuous threat and then ongoing threat impacts within the organization itself. So, have you assessed how ready you are, right? Regardless which part you are in, right? In or out. How ready is your service provider in terms of incident response? What's the playbooks that they have? Have you tested their playbooks through a tabletop exercise? And it's not just the technology team, right? And not just the security team. It could involve the entire organization itself. Then, do you think that, is there any attackers living off the land itself? Do you need some help to assess whether you have indeed been breached, right? Compromise assessments. I mentioned this a couple of times, you need to augment your team itself. You may be starting up in your SOC maturity. If you think that, you need help in it, who can you engage to augment and let your guys learn, right? What are the best practices, etc., in operating your SOC itself. And incident response, we always prepare for the rainy days, right? So retaining such a service so that, and as part of this whole assessment, right, get ready for this. And lastly, if you have a SOC already, how ready are they? At what level? What's And maybe it's good to do an assessment of what's happening. And lastly, like all good ISO processes or frameworks, right, there's always this CIP, right? Or is it CPI, continuous process improvement, right? And typically we do it every year, be it assessing, doing tabletops, etc. Right? So just a very quick rundown on what's needed from technology to services. And so hopefully with this, helps you to start your journey on the SOC itself. Typically, it's going to take a few years, right? It's not going to be an overnight thing. So while you implement it, while you execute your plans itself, what's next? I offer you two things, right? First, I think there is scope for a NOC and SOC integration, right? Because as you go tighter, today when it comes to attack surfaces, it's not just about a few elements, right? Attack surfaces has grown so much, not just within your not just within your infrastructure, but because people are working from anywhere, right? So if you want to be able to detect threats, if you want to at the same time, be able to maintain your user experience, customer experience, then working towards an integration of your NOC and a SOC would be a good way to go. The second one is a cyber physical operations center. In fact, we were talking with a customer in Singapore. They were really looking into this, right? Even for, if let's say you're a bank, right? You probably have a very well-established SOC, but that's again for cyber security, right? Now we are talking about beyond that, you've got ATMs, you've got branches. How do you integrate this cyber and physical into a single operation center, right? Something for you to think on probably a more mid-term, long-term strategy to build out your security. And whatever that I've talked about, it's something that FORTINET has already embarked in. Those customers, right, of ours, you probably have seen this in various forms. But it's what the security fabric is able to offer, end-to-end security, giving you a very broad coverage of your entire infrastructure, right? Integrating the solutions together. Integration means one thing, right? You're able to automate your responses better. The automation doesn't need to be just in terms of cyber security. It should also cover the networking portion, right? Remember the NOC and SOC convergence part of it. All right. So I'm just going to leave you with this slide. If there's any questions that you would like to address, I'm seated here where we can talk over lunch. And of course, you can approach my wonderful account team who's somewhere behind, right? Yes, and thank you very much for listening. Thanks.